Yes, sir. Dangerous and dangerous. Okay. All right. Good night. And thank you so much for your support over the last 2 years. It was not an easy time because we had to deal with so much dishonesty and wait not for the support that we knew of the supporters of the Dominica Labour Party like yourself. It might have been more difficult for us. I want to start by saying this was not just me. This was a legal team of lawyers, Heather Felix Evans, Lennox Lawrence. We had other support members of the team. We had Nanton providing support to us. We had Charles Savre. We had moral and physical support. We had people calling us every day. And this was a team effort. This is not a Tony thing. This was a team effort, and the team won. And I want to say also that I want to thank the Prime Minister for giving me the privilege to represent him and to represent his government. It's a privilege to represent a man you respect and a man that you believe was always legal. He is legal, and we want him in this country forever. Well, until he gets too old. Now, I don't really have much time because the Honorable Prime Minister comes on next, but I want to explain something to you about this case that a lot of us miss. Because a lot of us think it's just a case that is between Q and Carrie, and we go in court and we say the same foolishness you hear on Q and the same common sense you hear on Carrie. That's not how it works. There's a history. In 2005, the United Workers' Party came with election petitions. They lost them all. In 2010, Justice Thomas heard the petitions on the questions of the allegations of bribery, access to the media, and everything of the kind. These were thrown out. We then had the Strangler case, which we won again. This time the judge finding our Honorable Prime Minister being a man of truth. And then since then we've had this election matter that I will speak to you about. But then we also had the question of the Integrity Commission, which has been pregnant with lies. But another time for that. Some things I need to talk about tonight. Ron Green issued a statement today on the outcome of the game that reflects his complete stupidity, his complete ignorance, and his total dishonesty. He does not understand what it is the Court of Appeal said to him and to the people of this country. They didn't say that there was just no direct evidence against the Prime Minister and Peter Seja. They said there was no evidence at all. Direct, indirect, half-baked, full-baked, three-quarter or one-quarter evidence. There was none. And they also said, and when people talk about injustice, and when people talk about oppression, and when people talk about manipulating the process of the court, one man, two men suffered injustice in this case. It was not Ron Green, it was not Maynard Joseph. The Court of Appeal unanimously said that the only allegation, despite all the nonsense you hear on Q from Linton QC, and I'll give you an interpretation of QC in a while, because you have senior counsel, you have Queen's counsel, and you have quack counsel. Linton is the greatest quack counsel I ever heard in my life. He quacking like a duck about everything that he doesn't know about, but his arrogance makes him believe that he knows what he's talking about. The Court of Appeal said that once the Maynard Joseph and the lawyers for the United Workers' Party admitted that the allegation against Roosevelt Skerrit that he had admitted he had a passport was a lie, the case should have been thrown out at that point. The United Workers' Party dishonestly continued the case, knowing that they were bound by their petition, and they insisted on using the process of the court as political manure. I was told no bad words tonight, and no screaming, and no shouting. All right? The Court of Appeal then, that was all three of them. And all three of them said the only allegation against Peter Sessions was that he was issued a passport between 2000 and something. They brought the biggest crook and liar from La Plaine to come and say that Peter Sessions showed him the passport at the time. What he did not remember was that at the time he saw the passport in La Plaine, he was being deported from Guadeloupe by the French police. And only the good Lord can be two places at the same time, not a crook, and certainly not a crook belonging to the United Workers' Party. They belong in one place only, and that is jail. Now, the other thing that so they're not talking about that. They're not saying to the people in this country, and we have not been able to say it on Carrie or anywhere else because the case was going on, that they were dishonest, they fabricated evidence, and they lied freely. Ron Greencharles may not lie so much that I just tell Maynard Joseph, sorry. Maynard Joseph, sorry. Rest in peace, my brother. That it was becoming difficult to keep track. But the other thing the Court of Appeal said was that in relation to Roosevelt Skerrit and Peter Sessions, the United Workers' Party knew since 2010 in the ruling before Justice Thomas in the House of Parliament that they had an obligation to plead French law and to plead material facts committed by Roosevelt Skerrit and by Peter Sessions under French law. The lawyers for the United Workers' Party, the Court Counsel and others went on cue and said, Astaphan talking nonsense again. 210. We went back to the Court of Appeal, and those of you who were present in the Court of Appeal would have seen I fought one of the Court of Appeal judges for about an hour and a half on that very point. We were not prepared to let it go. We were not prepared to let it go. Of course, the UWP's lawyer come up and say, well, there goes Astaphan again. Well, this time the Court of Appeal said Astaphan was going in the right direction because the Court of Appeal agreed with me that the Justice Thomas should have thrown out the case since 2010 when we said there was no French law and no facts committed by Roosevelt Skerrit and Peter Sessions, either under French law, English law, Chinese law, Japan law, any law. Thank you. Nothing. And they go and they ridicule it. Well, you know, it's the public interest and the people have a right to know. The people don't have a right to know things that are not true. They simply don't. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is this. Court Counsel and the rest of his gang on Q are talking about this letter to the French. Peter Sessions and Roosevelt Skerrit wrote a letter about dual citizenship. The word passport does not mention, is not mentioned and does not appear in that letter. And they say, well, look, the fact that you write the letter, you're guilty. Well, I never heard that before in my life. But I suppose some lawyers are entitled to say anything they want and it sounds good because their accent different to mine. All right? But while they're saying that about Roosevelt Skerrit and Peter Sessions, when I'm cross-examining Ron Green in the box, he says, yes, I did write the Americans. I got legal advice, and I was told I did nothing wrong. But out of the abundance of caution, I decide to revoke my American citizenship. So I kept asking, well, what is different with what you did, which was okay, to what Peter Sergio and Roosevelt Skerrit did, that your lawyer saying is not okay? Ron Green said, well, I don't know. That is the sort of thing that we had to deal with. The other thing is this: Edison James and the United Workers' Party were saying, and in relation to Roosevelt Skerrit in particular, that they had acquired dual citizenship by virtue of their own act, meaning he applied for it. You will remember they published something in the Sun. I hope you read it. They then filed an election petition against Peter Sergio and Roosevelt Skerrit on the basis that they had acquired dual citizenship by virtue of their own act, which these fellows thought would have disqualified them. It turns out they hadn't read the law when they did what they did, because dual citizenship by virtue of your mother, or your father, or your grandmother, or your wife or your husband, no, well, that may be a little too far. Your mother and father, let's leave it there. What I go about? Don't let me say what I go about. It's not a disqualifying matter under our Constitution. They then hired a French lawyer called Madame Duhamel. And Madame Duhamel from Martinique sent in a report that says, hold on, Roosevelt Skerrit and Peter Sergio acquired French citizenship because of their mothers. And there is nothing to show that they acquired it because of anything that they did. You know what those fellas did? 2 weeks before the case, all of a sudden, a whole set of workers come out the bush in La Plaine and Vegas to come and give evidence. All of a sudden, 2-3 weeks before, 15 of them, 16 of them. But here the joke, some couldn't see well, but say they saw things on a tree with Skerrit face on it, and they see notice. Others couldn't read when I asked them to read. One guy from Vegas says, when I asked him, why are you here? From wherever he was, wherever. He said, well, they tell me they couldn't find witnesses, so they come for me. I asked another person, well, why are you here? I don't know. Where did you sign that document? The lawyer office. Who the lawyer? I don't know. Can you point to him, Mr.? That's how it was. And the worst part is, all of them, every single solitary one of those workers, everyone, come and say, they hear Edison James say, Roosevelt Skerrit have a passport. Peter Sergio have a passport. What they did not know, poor fellas and poor girls, was that Edison James had given evidence before them and denied ever saying they had a passport. And then you know what? Davidson Bruni, you know him? Big mouth Davidson Bruni from the United Workers' Party, who they plant on the Integrity Commission, together with Babs Dyer and Anthony Laron and Smith. But we're going to deal with them soon. Let them wait, time will come. They will not be able to say, this too shall pass. Had all the tapes. He says, well, it's my profession since 1970-something to tape everything the political leaders of the Labour Party and the Freedom Party and the United Workers' Party. I said, well, boss, what do you mean by everything? He said, so, everything. I said, well, if you take everything said about Roosevelt Skerrit, and if you take everything Roosevelt Skerrit said, you would accept that your tape recorder didn't pick him up saying, I had a passport. I think you may be correct, sir. I think you may be correct, sir. Then the crook from La Plaine, Moses Prosper. You know him? Check the court papers, you might see his name there sometimes. He says, he says, not, well, he was a classic. Not only did he say he saw the passport when the police was deporting him from Roseau, he says that he was on the ship when his witness statement was sent to him to sign. I said, well, how did it reach the boat? He said, well, I don't know. I said, well, let me help you. Fax, don't know. Email, don't know. Seagull? He paused. You mean a bird? I said, yes. He said, well, I don't think so, sir. And then he said, you see, all that joke, you know, he on cue. And I couldn't tell you on carry because they go say I'm talking too much. They like to say I talk too much. So long as I'm asked to talk too much, I will. Then the best part, Ron Green says, well, you know, the reason why we did this late is because Mr. Prosper told me after the election. And that's why I didn't do it before. You remember that, Peter? Prosper comes. You know them workers smiling when they're lying. They're good at that. Edison James, you know. So I said, well, when exactly did you tell Mr. Ron Green about his passport? The next day, sir. The next day? When was that? June something, 2009. But the election was December 2009. Mr. Ron Green said you showed it to him after the election. He looked at me, he looked at Ron Green, he looked at me again. He said, well, I'm not sure what to tell you, but it was either before or after the election. I said, okay, in fact, after all of that, the judge decided that he was a liar and rejected his evidence in total.